And with that, I'm happy to introduce our presenter, Dr. Jed Baker. He is the director of the Social Skills Training Project, and he serves on advisory boards for many autism organizations. He's also an award-winning author and has published over 8 books. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Baker.
Oh, thanks so much, Kaylee. So I am talking about this sort of preparing for a life. It's a huge topic, so I'm going to try to give the map of the territory, at least from my point of view. Of course, not the same as the territory, but I want to talk about all students today. I'm going to talk primarily about students who have quite a bit of language, but I'm also talking about students who have more challenges with their language functioning. Let's see if I can get my slide to progress. All right, so the first part, I want to talk a little bit about sort of predicting successful transition. There's a little bit of research on what predicts a successful sort of transition to adulthood. And part of that is, learning skills. And I want to sort of lay down what I think are the key components to teaching social skills. There's lots of tools out there to learn a variety of skills, but there are certain key components you have to keep in mind to make sure that we're effective in teaching and generalizing skills. And then the second part, I want to talk a little bit about how we sort of manage things that can get in the way of people's success. So if you will, the first part is on sort of harnessing people's strengths, but then the second part is like, how do we make sure we can address the things, challenging behaviors, anxiety, and such that might, that could get in the way. So let's start. So this is a little sort of a philosophical question. What is success? And a lot of that is sort of self-defined. Are people satisfied? Are you satisfied with where your life is? Sometimes people try to objectify success too, and some of the research I'll talk to you about in predictors of success talked about, people's employment status and educational status, financial status, the ability to avoid drugs and criminal activity and such. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both those objective standards of success and sort of self-defined. One issue that we think about with success is, the ability to choose what you do. The idea of sort of intrinsic motivation, that you get to sort of choose where you live, where you work. The more skills you have, the more choices you have in life. The less skills you have, the more sometimes other people make those choices for you. So I think it's important to build our skill level, our repertoire, to the point where you can kind of do a little bit more of what you want to do. The other issue around success is what we call life satisfaction. And there's some interesting research on sort of the difference between life satisfaction and hedonistic pleasure. So, like food, tastes good, feels good. Drugs can sort of feel good temporarily, but have long-term disastrous consequences at times. Winning at the lottery feels really good, but doesn't necessarily lead to life satisfaction when you look at the data on lottery winners. Life satisfaction has less to do with sort of hedonistic pleasure and more to do with a sense of being useful in some way, that you have some positive impact on other people, that you have some value. And I think that's what we want for many of our clientele, is to be able to feel like part of something, whether it's valued at a job, valued in a relationship with friends or a romantic partner or family. So when we think about success, let's think about sort of that piece, that life satisfaction, a sense of belonging. So there's an interesting bit of research in the learning disabilities literature that's, I think, relevant to the sort of autism spectrum literature as well. Roberta Goldberg in California at the Frostig Center did a 20-year longitudinal study on what was predictive of her students in the Frostig Center program for people with learning challenges to have successful outcomes, adult outcomes. And success was defined in part on things like employment status and educational status, financial status, but also life satisfaction. So there were a couple things that were predictive. One is self-awareness. It's very important that our clientele, to the extent possible, have a good awareness of their strengths and their abilities, as well as some of their challenges. But what seemed to be key in predicting success was the ability of students to compartmentalize their challenges, which means that they said basically, okay, I might have this challenge, but that doesn't define me. That's a part of me. What maybe defines me is that I am good at math, or I'm an artist, or you know, I'm incredibly responsible at my work. So it's our strengths that kind of take us places, and our challenges that we need to just be aware of in order to get the supports, but we don't want our challenges necessarily to define us. Almost every client that I work with, particularly verbal clients, I start with this issue of self-awareness, because this is the key to motivation. This is the key to moving people to partnering with you to achieve their goals, to have the awareness of their abilities and their strengths, because their understanding of their strengths leads to hope, an optimistic future. And that's the motivation people need to want to work on challenges that otherwise could get in the way. The second sort of predictor of success in the Goldberg study was proactivity, meaning that individuals were actively engaged in making decisions for themselves. You know, where they're going to work, what programs they want to be in. They weren't just passive recipients. And I think when people do have an awareness of their talents and their strengths, they tend to be more active in making decisions towards their own goals. The third predictor was perseverance. And I'm going to talk to you about sort of perseverance using Carol Dweck's growth mindset concept. So if you don't know what that is, in the next couple slides, I'm going to get to that and show you sort of what Carol Dweck's growth mindset is all about. But from the Goldberg study point of view, perseverance was really about flexibility when you reach an obstacle. When there's a failure, when there's a setback, were people flexible enough to get around it? Or did they continue to try to go through a brick wall and just keep experiencing the same failure over and over again? And sort of Carol Dweck's growth mindset is very much about, you know, people's understanding that mistakes and setbacks are part of learning, and you learn from them and you continue on. So we'll talk about that. The next one is appropriate goal setting. So in the Goldberg study, people who had sort of realistic goals, first of all, people who had goals, you have to have like somewhere you're trying to get to. And you know what's interesting too is that sometimes those goals and self-awareness as well were in somewhat created by parents, by family members. So when kids were uncertain of themselves and what they wanted to do in life, sometimes parents had some ideas of, you know, directions their kids can go in. But the goals have to be sort of flexible too. So if you're not going to make it as American Idol top singer in the United States, you know, is there another goal that is more realistic? The next one is effective use of social support. So all the people in Goldberg's study, those who were successful and not so successful, had social support. But the interesting thing that predicted some success was the type of social support that successful students had was when families had big ideas for their kids. They thought big. They didn't enable them to always be dependent on the parents. And I think a good example is a student I have who was nonverbal growing up. And it would be easy for some folks at schools to have sort of underestimated this young man. But mom was a force of nature and had big ideas for her son, who became an artist, and she supported him in being able to travel from New Jersey through Penn Station into Brooklyn to work at a bakery to decorate cakes, to grow his art business. And so the idea is that we don't want to enable people to be dependent forever, that we can think big. We have to give them the support to achieve those goals, though. The last is emotional stability. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time on that today. So everybody who has challenges is going to have some stress, some anxiety, some frustration, but our ability to develop coping strategies to deal with the triggers to our stress, the triggers to frustration, is sort of key in being successful. So I promised you to talk about Carol Dweck's mindset, so let's do that. If you're not familiar with her book, you know, Mindset for Success, I'll give you the 2-minute summary here. So Carol Dweck talks about the way people think about their intelligence, their abilities, affects how motivated and successful their outcomes will be. So one way to think about your intelligence is what she calls a fixed mindset, which is not the way to go. A fixed mindset is the idea that you're just born with a fixed amount of intelligence. It doesn't change. The better way to think is what we call a growth mindset, that your intelligence changes over time with experience. And you can teach people to have a growth mindset, that you can learn things, that even if you don't know things or don't understand things or make mistakes with things, you can learn. Let's go back to a fixed mindset. If you have the idea that you can't sort of change your brain, basically, you don't want to, you prefer easy tasks to do. You don't want to do something difficult that you'll make a mistake and look stupid in front of other people. So people with a fixed mindset tend to choose activities that they already know how to do. They don't want to make mistakes, because if they make a mistake, it means, well, I guess I'm not smart enough. And they sort of quit after that. They lose motivation. And they don't want to accept help, particularly special education help, which somehow then spells for them that their brain isn't good enough, somehow that they're defective if they have that fixed mindset. That's sort of the belief system. And then people like that have lower learning outcomes, because they're not trying difficult work. They lose a motivation if they make a mistake, and they don't want to get help. But people have a growth mindset, the idea that, you learn by trying things you don't know, making mistakes and getting help, and that's how you learn. Those people have higher outcomes. Why? Because they're trying difficult work. They know that making mistakes is part of learning, and they are willing to accept help. They know that the key to life, this is what I tell all my clients, the key to life is perseverance, stay motivated, keep trying when you make a mistake, and seek out help. It's both. It's not just perseverance. It's not just the tortoise and the hare story, slow and steady wins the race. You also have to be willing to accept help. And by the way, that may be one of the biggest obstacles for many of our clientele, is their willingness to accept help, because the idea that accepting help is sort of stigmatizing for them. And we have to destigmatize that is actually what most people do. They seek out help, and if you're willing to do that, you can achieve most anything. So with that sort of background of what sort of predicts success, we can sort of build a model of success. Like the first step is for people to have sort of self-awareness about their abilities, their talents that can lead to an optimistic future. So they have hope and motivation to learn. And to be able to compartmentalize that, to know that they have these strengths and talents, but their challenges don't define them. They're just things they need to be aware of in order to get the supports they need. And the self-awareness sets them up then to be good self-advocates, to be able to disclose to people what kinds of support or help they might need for their strengths to shine. The second part of the model is then, getting the support and the help that they need, which may come in the form of different kinds of modifications throughout school, sometimes accommodations in a workplace, skills training to buoy the areas of challenge. And this is sort of what mostly I do in my career. The third area, which is more challenging for me as a therapist, as a clinician, is creating opportunities. If we now have a motivated person who's developed some skills, have we located for them enough sort of opportunities for them? So first of all, there's some financial opportunities when you have autism spectrum disorders. There are certain government programs that will provide some supports, like DDD and SSI or SSDI. These are government programs that may support an income for our clientele when they're not working or they're not able to get a job yet. There are certain things practicality that we have to think about, like being eligible for DDD and Medicaid, so that we don't show too many assets. So we think about creating special needs trusts to make sure that people can be eligible for those programs. We can have our clientele apply to Division of Vocational Rehab, DVR, before they graduate high school, so that they're in a position to get maybe some job coaching once they graduate. When they are in high school, we really want our clientele to be getting some vocational assessments, at least by junior year, where they begin to think about, before they graduate, what are some of their skills and talents and interests that would lead to certain job areas. And then by junior and senior year, we really want them doing some job sampling. And the reason we want to do this in high school is that the stats are not great for our kids with disabilities once they graduate. The supports take longer to get. They will get jobs, but it takes longer. And if they can have some job experience before they graduate from high school, all the better. Okay. The last piece I want to say about opportunity is often the opportunities are not found in these government programs, but rather the family's own network of friends. They may have a friend who has some kind of workplace organization is willing to hire their kid. And often it's these sort of more personal networks that help our students gain employment. So let's talk a little bit about disclosure. We said if you have self-awareness, then you're able to sort of disclose to others what your needs are, what kind of help you need. So first of all, when should you disclose? Certainly in high school, if you need modifications and you need some accommodations, you want to be able to disclose that to the school so that you can get the support you need to be successful in school and to compete for vocational programs or college programs. When you're out of high school, I think the issue of disclosure is really a little bit more vague, because I'm not so sure it's worth disclosing if the behavior that you have in an interview is pretty typical behavior. And I say that, and let's just talk about the words typical and atypical, or expected and unexpected. Michelle Garcia Winner, Social Thinking, uses these words. When you do what's expected for a social situation, people are comfortable. When you do unexpected things, people may be a little bit uncomfortable. Well, there are a lot of employers, they're not allowed to sort of discriminate and not hire you because you have a disability. But nevertheless, there are employees who do that, employers who do that. And they may not say that they're not hiring you because you have a disability, but they may in fact do that. And so if you're going to interview and there's nothing about the first impression that you give off that's so unexpected, I would suggest you don't disclose. And then once you get the job, then you can say what kind of supports might be necessary for you to continue to be successful. On the other hand, if during a job interview your behavior may be unexpected, let's say you have large delays in verbal expression, some halting kind of language, or something else that suggests to the interviewer, hey, this person is presenting a little differently, I think that it's worth explaining and disclosing, because if you don't explain it, an interviewer might think, might have some sort of stereotype that's much worse than the actual challenges that you present with. So then when you disclose, what do you disclose? So you do want to give an official diagnostic label in order to be sort of in a protected group, in order to justify getting certain kinds of accommodations. But sometimes we don't always have to use ASD. You also don't always have to disclose the official diagnostic label, but maybe you want to disclose something that sort of leads to a reason why you'll need some kind of supports. So a lot of my clients might say that they have some social anxiety, and so they're not going to engage in a lot of chit chat, but they're going to be, very reliable and very work oriented. So you can use the diagnostic label. I gave an example here. The good news is I'll be more reliable and work oriented with ASD, yet I'll need a clear written instructions and may not always engage in chit chat. So there's a way to sort of explain this in a positive way, that the lack of social ability or social ease actually makes you a better employee because you're more work-oriented. Some of the modifications at work that some of my clientele have asked for are things like a quiet workspace or written instructions, so that they don't just have to rely on a series of verbal instructions from their boss. Also, periodic or regular access to their supervisor to kind of check in, am I doing the right thing here? Or to check in for questions. Those are some typical requests. As part of self-awareness training, when we talk about people with autism spectrum disorders, I always think it's useful to sort of have really sort of successful, talented people who've had ASD as sort of part of the understanding, so that it's, you know, there's a sense that you can have ASD and that's not really what defines you. Albert Einstein was thought to have Asperger's. Perhaps Bill Gates is described as having Asperger's as well. But they're known for their incredible abilities. Thomas Edison, Wolfgang Mozart, Marie Curie, and our own Temple Grandin. These are all people who are incredibly talented and successful people and have ASD. So let's switch gears now and talk about key components of social skills training, or skills training in general. Presumably now, if we have enough self-awareness, we are in a position now to maybe want to work on certain skills so that we can make sure our talents and our abilities and strengths are able to shine. So what are some of the key components to teaching skills? The first issue is, you know, what are we going to teach? We don't have time to teach every social skill in the world. It doesn't make sense to do that. So sort of in general, we've talked about teaching some self-awareness, the ability to self-advocate. There are certainly some self-care skills and job skills people will need. But I think what we really want to do is zero in on some sort of individualized or personalized skill targets. And I just ask some very practical questions when I think about, you know, what skills to teach. And those practical questions are this: what does this individual do almost on a daily basis? What are they doing either too much of or too little of to succeed in the expected setting where they are, whether it's a work setting or school setting? What do they do too much of or too little of? Too much of are often sort of disruptive behaviors, so like becoming verbally or physically aggressive when they're frustrated with a task, or they can't have something they want immediately, or somebody maybe gives them some critical feedback, or they make a mistake. Too much behavior can also be talking endlessly about their interest, whether the other person is interested or not, or interrupting a million times a day, or not respecting people's personal space. Too little may be not able to sort of join in or initiate conversation or respond to other people's initiations. And how many skill targets should we target? There's no magic number, but they need to be user-friendly. And so although, you know, lots of people might need skills to interview for a job, that's not a daily priority. We want to think of what's a daily priority. If somebody has their finger up their nose, that might be a daily priority. If that's the thing that gets in the way of them socializing with someone, that's going to become a target. So we need to think about what's sort of a daily priority. And I think about 3 to 7 skills in that range is user-friendly. And why 3 to 7? Because eventually we're going to want people to remind that individual to use that skill. And you can't give somebody 75 things to remember to do every day. So we think of a small number, 3 to 7. So as an example, I had a young man in a recreational program at high school, and it was like a social rec program. And we sent out questionnaires to parents and staff and the individual themselves about what that individual may be doing too much of or too little of that was a challenge for them socially. And everyone agreed that this individual wasn't initiating in social interaction during this rec program or other social times. And so then we went and observed, and sure enough, we saw that that individual really wasn't initiating or joining into social interaction during the rec program. In fact, he was off to the side doing like statuesque poses. We weren't sure what that was. So we all decided that then we prioritized joining in and initiating social interaction for that individual would be a target. And so we taught him how to sort of play the games that other people were playing during that social rec time, whether it were board games or some more physically oriented games. When it came time for the rec program, we had taught him how to play those games. We said, go ahead and play those games. And he said, no, just leave me alone. and he said he wanted friends, but he just said, leave me alone. So number 2 is motivation. It doesn't matter if we've targeted the right skill if that individual is not interested in learning the skill. So we all decided that, you know, joining in and into social interaction was an important target for him. But this young man didn't buy into that idea necessarily. But he did say he wanted friends, so he did want some social interaction, but he didn't want to interact during that social rec time. So there's 2 ways to think about motivation. One is extrinsic motivation, where we use an external reward. So we could say to him, okay, listen, why don't you just, if you play that game with those guys for like 5 minutes, then you can have access, you know, to your laptop, which was a reward for him. So we could use some kind of external reward. Sometimes there's no external reward powerful enough to get somebody to, you know, do something we're hoping they'll do, like interact socially. So then we look at intrinsic motivation. How do we make interacting with the others more interesting? So it's not that you get a reward afterwards. How do we make the actual social interaction more interesting? So when we went to observe him, and when they were all playing games, he was off to the side doing these statue X poses like this, and other kinds of movements. And we asked him what that was. And he said, this was eland. And then I said, what's this? He says, grizzly bear. Well, I realized that this is a young man who was going to the Natural History Museum every Sunday in New York City, a suburb of, he was in a school as a suburb of New York. And he would see these taxidermied animals behind glass. And so his interest was in these animals. He knew their natural habitat, their Latin name. And so we said, well, forget about the board games all these people are playing. Let's play the animal guessing game where you act out animals and you have to figure out, you know, what the other person's acting out. And so that was a highly motivating social activity for him to engage in. So now, not only did we target the skill that everybody saw as an issue for him to sort of interact socially with others, but number 2, we had the motivation. He wanted to do it around his interest, the animals. The next key component is that we make sure we teach the skill in a way that he understands. So now that he was motivated to interact socially, he would go up to people and he would grab them physically by the hair or by the scruff of their neck and say, let's play the animal guessing game. Well, that's not really the way to ask, so we had to teach him how to do that. The way you teach skills depends on someone's language functioning. He had pretty good receptive language, what we call level 1 autism, what we used to call Asperger's. And so we could just explain to him, you know, in verbal form, explain, model, and role play. That, hey, listen, when you get too close, you're going to push people away. You want to, you know, be in about an arm's length away and ask, hey, do you want to play the animal guessing game? And then we could model it, and then we could role play it with him. And so that's what's appropriate for a level 1. For level 2 is somebody who has language but still needs some visual support for their language. So we may have to show him maybe in picture form how you approach people to ask to play the animal guessing game. Level 3 is when people have really significant language challenges, and then we really aren't going to be able to use much language, but really have to stick to sort of more visual techniques where we either show sort of a cartoon picture of how to ask someone to play, or a video of it, or prompt him physically through the motions. Just to give you an example of sort of level 3, level 2 kinds of supports. Oh, hold on. I must have, let me give you that. Hold on one sec. This is a sort of level 2 or level 3, just a visual support for, say, hygiene, right? So it's a picture version of that. This is a sort of level 2 version of having a conversation where we might, if we're practicing conversation with someone, we might create a sort of conversation web like this, where we write in the answers. So like if we're asking somebody about their week, how was your week? We might write in the answers of who they saw, what they did, where they went. And so when we ask them these questions, they have like a picture of the answers. So they have a way to respond. Because they have a visual backup for it. But with a with a level 1 person, you don't need that necessarily. With someone who has sort of level 1 language, we can really just explain, model, and role play. Let's say we've done that teaching. We explained, we modeled and role play how he could ask people to play with others, the animal guessing game. He's got it. We practiced it. We send him out to that rec program, and what does he do? He grabs people by the hair again, because just because you teach something in a counseling session is not a guarantee that they're going to generalize that skill to the real deal setting. So we really need to think about generalization. When you're teaching skills, one of the key components is to create some kind of support, whether it's a cue card or it's a reminder on their smartphone of what the skill is. They need to be primed just before they need it. So we would have the parent go over it in the morning with him. When you have that rec program today, remember, be an arm's length away. Don't touch people when you ask them to play the animal guessing game. We would have one of the staff people go over those rules with him just before that recreation time. We would try to coach him in the moment at the recreation time and then review afterwards. Prime, coach, review. So most clientele that I have, if you really want to generalize skills, consider creating a cue card or some kind of reminder app that reminds them of what to do before they need it to generalize to a natural setting. The fifth issue is peer sensitivity. Sometimes we've got our student doing all the right things, but other kids, other students, other clientele are not being particularly sensitive to our client. And so sometimes we want to create a program where peers are reaching out to our student and not just our student having to figure out how to fit in. Okay. And last but not least is evaluating outcome. So observable measures may be the more objective, right? So we can actually see him in that rec setting. Does he ask people, to play the animal guessing game without necessarily touching them? We can sort of count the frequency of that behavior. But subjective ratings are also very good measures of social success, even though they're subjective, because how well you do in a social setting is a subjective thing. It's based on how the other people perceive you. So on a scale of 1 to 5, we can ask staff, we can ask others, how does this individual interact socially at the rec program without touching others? How well does he ask to play without sort of touching other people? 1, never; 2, rarely; 3, sometimes; 4, usually; 5, always. So this is what I do when I have progress reports due, is I'll get a subjective rating like that. There are normed scales of social skills to rate your where somebody's at socially. I do not use those clinically. Those are good for research studies. If a particular school is getting sued and you want to have some way to say whether this individual is showing pretty decent social skills for their age and gender, you could use these. But if you're working on a very specific targeted skill that you've created for that student, those scales may not have that target in it. So I don't use those clinically. So to review, those are the 6 key components to skills training. When you have a kid, a young man, young woman who is having social challenges, you have to ask, have I targeted the right skills? Are they motivated? If they're not motivated, they're not going to enter a social skill group and work on this. We got to win them over. We got to talk about their abilities and their interests and why they might want to work on these skills. Have we taught them, broke it down for them how to do these particular skills? And have we created some way for them to generalize those skills? And are they in a positive peer environment where people are now including and valuing that individual? And then have we evaluated outcome? Those are the key components. So let's see. I want to move the discussion now to managing the things that can get in the way of our social success or successful outcome in general for our clientele. So when we talk about managing frustration and anxiety, so those things don't get in the way. I want to start by talking about maybe all of our listeners right now, or many of our listeners, are caregivers, caretakers, caregivers. Whether we're teachers, whether we are mental health professionals, wherever we are, if we're supporting students on the spectrum, we need to understand why our clientele misbehave, because when we have the right attitude, we can get better outcomes. So I want to show you the right attitude to have. When we have the right attitude, we're better able to manage our own emotions when crises develop. And if we can stay calm, if we can be chill, we can help others be chill. We can help others de-escalate when they're in a meltdown. And then finally, I really want to talk about how we set up prevention plans for any kind of repeat problem. We don't want to just put out the fire after the fact. We want to be able to see what triggers our students and our clientele and prevent those problems. So let's talk about us first. How do we handle our own emotions as caregivers? When there is really horrible and difficult behavior in front of us, there's some interesting research that when we have hope that this is a temporary issue, we get better outcome. My former supervisor when I was in grad school, colleague now, Mark Durand, wrote a book called Optimistic Parenting. And in Mark Durand's book, he reviewed some longitudinal research he did on young kids with autism, ages 3 to 6 years old. And he wanted to see what was most predictive of how aggressive they would be in their homes. And so he thought, well, how aggressive they were at 3 would be the best predictor of how aggressive they were at 6, but that was not the best predictor. Then he thought, well, if they lack language, they may become frustrated and more aggressive. And that was somewhat predictive, but that was not the best predictor. The best predictor was parental attitude, hope, optimism versus pessimism. When parents had hope that things could get better, they kept doing the things to make things better. When they lost hope, progress halted. Hope leads to better outcome. And what we mean by hope is that when the difficult behavior happens in front of our eyes, we say it's temporary, it's not stable, it's not forever. That it's a specific issue. Maybe that person doesn't know how to get attention in positive ways. We can teach that. It's not that they're a bad kid. Okay? So it's temporary, it's a specific skill that may be missing. And the third issue is not to take it personally. Easier said than done, right? If somebody looks at you, you're not my boss, I don't care what you say, I hate you, you're stupid. How do we not take that personally? We have to understand it's not about us. It's about that individual doesn't have better skills yet to know how to handle this. And so what we often mean is it's an external, not an internal attribution. Internal attribution is where we blame somebody. It's their fault. They're doing it on purpose to drive me crazy. How many people out here have sort of often wondered, is this kid just manipulating me? Or is this actually a manifestation of their disability? They can't help it. And what I'm going to say to you is you don't have to answer that question. You'll never know, actually. If it's a repeat problem, it doesn't matter if they're doing it on purpose or not. If it's a repeat problem, we have to do things differently because whatever we're doing isn't working. And what we mean by an external attribution is we define the problem as not the kid's fault, not the teacher's fault, not the parent's fault, but there's a gap between the demands we're placing on that individual and their ability to cope with those demands. And there's 2 places to intervene. We modify the demands or we up their coping skills. Okay, so all I'm saying is this: we all here will get better outcome with our clientele when we think in the following way. When there's difficult, frustrating, out of control behavior, we see it as temporary. We see it as a specific skill issue that we can teach. We see it as a gap between the demands placed on the individual and their coping skills. All of that is a way of seeing things as a solvable problem. Now we framed the problem correctly. What I also want to share here is a deeper understanding of what's going on sort of physiologically for some of our clientele when they have difficult behaviors of either overwhelming frustration and anger or overwhelming anxiety and depression. We say that some of our clientele get frustrated easily. And you don't have to have a disability to get frustrated easily. So let me point out, all of us have sort of a tremendous complexity to our brains, but I'm going to sort of point out 2 large systems in our brain. One is the limbic system that controls our emotions, our fight, flight, or freeze response. So when we are threatened, we can go into that sort of limbic stage where we're not really thinking anymore. We're just ready to fight, we're ready to run away, or we're ready to sort of hide out, freeze until there's no danger. Another part of the brain, the forebrain, is more involved with reasoning and planning, where we sort of think things through, sort of conceptual thinking. So one of the analogies that I use with all my clientele is the Incredible Hulk and Dr. Banner. So the Incredible Hulk is like the limbic system. It is our survival mode response, our emotional reactivity that kicks in. Whereas the forebrain is like Dr. Banner, the sort of scientific thinking that plans and thinks things through. The idea here is that when we're sufficiently threatened, the Incredible Hulk part of the brain hijacks the rest of the brain. Dr. Banner disappears, and now we're just all in Hulk mode. And the problems that we have with our clientele when they're super anxious, frustrated, anger, that's fight, flight, or freeze, right? They're ready to fight with us verbally or physically. They're going to run away. They're an elopement risk, or they just shut down with anxiety and depression, okay? What is it that helps the Incredible Hulk? Well, here's what doesn't help the Incredible Hulk. When somebody's in Hulk mode, it doesn't help to bring military assault helicopters and threaten the Incredible Hulk. In other words, having a power struggle and trying to control the Hulk in some kind of angry way, fighting fire with fire, often just makes things worse, right? Because we're threatening somebody who is the Incredible Hulk because they are threatened, and now we're threatening them more, okay? And this is sort of why discipline very often isn't going to work with highly dysregulated clientele, why that disciplinary approach doesn't always work. It can, in fact, make things worse for some 30% of kids who have some kind of Hulk-like challenge. Who has those Hulk-like challenges? Individuals with severe ADHD, anxiety, mood disorders, bipolar disorder, intermittent explosive disorder. These are folks who, you know, when they're in those states, aren't going to be logical and respond to the threat of discipline. What does help the Incredible Hulk? Scarlett Johansson. What I mean by that is somebody that they trust who can calm them. And so the first stage of dealing with the Incredible Hulk is trust. We talk about behavior management. First stage is trust. A guy named Willingham from Harvard, cognitive psychologist, wrote a book, Why Kids Don't Like School. And in that book, he talks about sort of what predicts effective teaching. And what seems to predict effective teaching are two dimensions. One is warmth and caring. He puts a picture of Joey from Friends. Says, Joey is this warm, caring guy. You know, the guy likes you. That is predictive of effective teaching. It builds trust, right? But Joey would still be a lousy teacher because he's missing the other dimension, which is being organized and structured. We need both. To develop trust, we need to be warm and caring, like Scarlett Johansson is to the Incredible Hulk, but we also need to be structured and maybe predictable. We have visual supports. We use differentiated instruction, meaning we don't teach everybody in the same way. We sort of teach to the window of where they can understand, and that creates some comfort. The 80-20 rule is another thing that builds trust. What is the 80-20 rule? It means when we work with certain students, we start with the 80% of work that we know they can do successfully, so they build confidence. We don't start with the 20% that's really difficult and they experience failure, because then when we come back to work with them, they don't want to work with us. They associate us with failure. So for certain kids, we make sure that every time we work with them, we're going to give them 80% of what's really easy to do, and they'll be successful before the 20% that's difficult. So they build that confidence. We avoid escalating power struggles with somebody who's highly dysregulated, who tends to be the Incredible Hulk, because you can't win the power struggle, right? And so what do we do with an individual when they're the Incredible Hulk? If we can't sort of just use discipline and have a power struggle with them, right? Let's talk about crisis management, right? What do we do to sort of de-escalate the Incredible Hulk? Step one is nonverbal skills to increase safety. We don't threaten them. We may back away. If somebody's getting agitated and upset, we may move away. We may talk in a quieter voice and a calm voice, be chill as we can, okay? We may Listen, agree, and apologize. You know, what would Scarlett Johansson say to the Incredible Hulk? I hear what you're saying, Hulk. You're right. You're right. I'm so sorry that they took that cupcake from you. You know, I was an example of a student that didn't get a cupcake in class and was hitting another student, and they became the Incredible Hulk because they missed out on the last cupcake because somebody else took it. And so, you know, we listened to their side of the story. We had agreed, you're right, she shouldn't have taken that cupcake. I'm so sorry that happened. All of that's de-escalating. And then if there's still a little Dr. Banner there, we try to collaborate. What does that mean? It means, and this is the key to therapy, how do we give people what they want in a better way? You know, I hear you saying you want to beat up that student, but I think what you really wanted was a cupcake, right? So if you work with me, I'm going to get you a cupcake. I don't have one today, but I get you a really good cupcake. The one that she had was terrible anyway. It was nasty and stale. I can get you a good cupcake. Can we give that student a better way to get what they need? That's the key to therapy. But there are times when all of Dr. Banner Logic Brain is gone. They're fully the Incredible Hulk now. And they say, when you tell them that you can get them a cupcake, they say, I don't care, I'm going to kill them. And they're just in this rageful place. When all logic is gone, what helps the Incredible Hulk? Distraction. Distraction. So maybe we have some novel item. Like I went to Slovenia recently and did a talk there, and I brought back these gold coins. And so I might then bring my gold coin and say, hey, did I give you one of these? These are sort of valuable. And can I distract that individual who's the Incredible Hulk away from what's bothering them by something they've never seen? A special interest. Maybe that individual has a specialized interest in Japanese anime. Pokemon cards. That's the example, little picture I have on the screen here. And so in the middle of their rage, I bring out my Pokemon cards. Is this one valuable? You know, how many, attack points does this one have? How much damage does this one have, etc. Or a sensory activity. Maybe there's some kind, like having a snack, taking a walk, getting a drink of water, listening to music. All of these can be a sensory input that is calming and distracting. So the point of what I'm saying is when someone's at their worst and out of control, Incredible Hulk behavior, rather than punish them, which can make it worse, we can distract, get their mind off of it. But some of you out there may be thinking, isn't that rewarding a tantrum? And so the answer is sometimes. And so we have to be careful. If somebody's trying to avoid doing a task, like you gave them homework to do, and they're throwing and raging and throwing things over, and you say, oh, well, let's watch a video instead. That might reward a tantrum. And so instead of running to distraction, I would give them a better way to avoid the task, like teach them they could ask for a break. They don't have to break things and yell and scream. Just say, I need a break, and I'll honor that. We'll give you a 5-minute break or a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and try again, or I'll simplify the task. If you had 10 sentences to write and you're freaking out, hey, let's just write 2 sentences, and then let's take a break, okay? Now, if somebody is in that Incredible Hulk, not because they're avoiding a task, but maybe somebody gave them critical feedback. Somebody told them they did something wrong and they're raging and they're yelling, and you say, oh, come here, let's play a game of Uno. And we start playing a card game and the person calms down. That didn't reward the tantrum, right? Let's say they're tantruming because they wanted a Twix bar and you couldn't get them a Twix bar. Well, I can play Uno with them to get their mind off of it without giving them the Twix bar. That's a really good example of I don't have to give in to the tantrum, but I can get your mind off the problem. Okay, so this is just crisis management. What we really want to do is get ahead of repeat problems. We don't want to just put out a fire all the time with our distraction techniques. We want to get to a point of understanding why the problem occurs so that we can prevent it. And what behaviorists do is what they call a functional behavioral assessment, an FBA, to try to understand why a repeat problem occurs. And they try to sort of lay down what the triggers are. We call them the ABCs of behavior. Antecedent, behavior, consequence. We ask people to kind of keep track of a difficult behavior. What are the antecedents or the triggers? What's the behavior? And what happened afterwards? The ABCs, antecedent, behavior, consequence. The before, during, and after. My focus is really on what are the triggers. If I understand what the triggers are to that challenging behavior, I'm in a position to put a plan together that sort of modifies those triggers or teaches them a better way to deal with those triggers. So I'm always looking for what are the triggers. Okay. I wrote down, I have a little meltdown, No More Meltdown app that's available on smartphones, and that can help you identify what the triggers are to a challenging behavior. So if you go to the App Store on Apple, or if you have a Droid phone, go to simtrend.com, you can get that No More Meltdowns app and allow you to track behavior in real time. So look, if here, the key again for me is understanding the triggers. Here's an example of sort of common triggers that may set off difficult behaviors. Are there more than these categories of triggers? Sure, but these are the triggers I see over and over again. So internal issues is when there's something going on inside the student, like they're hungry, they're tired, they're ill, they're grieving the loss of something, they have a hormonal challenge, high libido, things like this can maybe create some behavioral problems at times. Why do we suspect an internal issue? If we see an increase in problematic behavior in every setting that individual goes to, we know they're carrying the problem with them. Everywhere they go, they're having a higher set of problems today. It wasn't just a reaction to, say, not getting something they wanted or losing a game. It was everywhere they went. So then we suspect there's something going on internally, and we want to check in with family members and people who know the student. Hey, is there something going on differently? Did they not, are they sick? Are they ill? Was there a change in their family life? Is there a change in medication? What may be going on? Sensory issues, another large category. So a lot of time, challenging behavior occurs when there was too much stimulation. People around that individual were too loud or noisy, or there were just too many people, or the opposite, boredom. That a lot of problems occur for, say, ADHD kids when there's not enough stimulation. And somebody is just sort of doing what I'm doing now, lecturing at them, and so they're just not engaged, right? In fact, a lot of self-stim behavior in an autism spectrum is when people aren't engaged. If they're not engaged with your instruction, that's when you're going to see more self-stim behavior. They're going to entertain themselves. Or if they're highly anxious because it's an overwhelming situation, they may engage in self-stim as a way to soothe. Lack of structure is another large sort of a trigger. So that means there aren't any maybe visual supports that indicate to the individual what they were supposed to do. So a lot of times, like, recreation programs look that way, like it's a free-for-all. Go socialize, everybody. And our kids don't really know how to get into games necessarily, or how to join in. And so that kind of lack of structure can lead to behavioral challenges. A really common trigger is challenging work. So any kind of maybe academic work, writing, reading, all those kinds of things can trigger. Or a variety of fears and phobias can be a trigger. So I had a student who was afraid of insects. So anytime he was outside in the summer, we were going to have an issue because there are insects outside. Having to wait or not get what you want, some kind of disappointment, right, is a major category of trigger. And I think a subcategory of that, when you don't get what you want, is the idea of social injustice. When you hear our students say that it's not fair, how come she always gets that and I don't? That's a sense of like disappointment. I'm not getting something that others are getting. So I'll show you how we create prevention plans for that kind of trigger. And then the next is threats to self-esteem. And so these are things like when you have some of our students are perfectionists. So if they lose a game or they make a mistake or somebody criticizes them, that's going to be a trigger for difficult behavior. And the last category are unmet wishes for attention. When somebody craves lots of attention from a staff person, from a family member, from peers, or they just don't know how to get attention. They keep getting attention in sort of inappropriate ways, ways that maybe get attention, but not in ways that people sort of like them for it. So I'm going to show you how we kind of create prevention plans for each of these kinds of triggers. So a good prevention plan highlights number 1 and 2 here. How do we alter the thing that triggers them? And number 2, how do we teach them better ways to cope with the thing that triggers them? And then we can reward the new coping skill. We certainly do not want to use a law system with the Incredible Hulk. If someone's on fire, you don't want to be taking things away from them. You could potentially use a law system with somebody who is dysregulated with positive emotions, but not with negative emotions. So let's take a look at the first major trigger, demands for work. So what do we do with a student who they're triggered by difficult academic work? And a lot of our students may be like this, like any amount of reading and writing could be a trigger for them. So I want to show you a video of a student. It's actually from YouTube. A father is trying to get her his daughter to do some work on a math worksheet on place value. So there's a decimal point, and he says, here's what's in the tenths, here's what's in the hundredths, what's in the thousandth place. And she doesn't know the answer, so she starts to get upset and bang her head. I want you to think about, if you're dad, how do you modify this situation so that it's going to be less of a trigger for her? And number two, what do we teach her to do instead of yelling and banging her head? How do we teach her better to cope with it? So let's take a look. You're going to hear, I think the mother and the girl's sister are in the background. And the girl's sister says something about a red house. You can just ignore that. We're just going to pay attention to what the father and the daughter say here. And think about, how does dad modify? How do we teach her how to cope better?
What's this? Hundreds. Okay?
Come here, Rachel. Come on.
Where's your big eraser?
What do you need?
Stop scribbling all over your paper like that.
I need to go into red house.
Okay, now, there's the decimal.
Where's Lyra?
Okay. Where's the thousands? This
Lyra?
is the tens. Hundreds. Where's the thousands? Okay. Here. Look, I'm helping you.
Up to red house.
Look. Okay. What's this?
I don't know.
I've written it, so now you do know. Tell me. This is the chart.
I don't know how to play this stuff.
Here you go. What place is this? Here's the decimal. What do you call this? What's it say? What's the answer for it? All you have to do is read it from the chart.
Rachel, come here. Come on, get another one. Be quiet. Be quiet now.
Okay, that's a lot of fun, right? Look, dad said, here's what's in the tens, here's what's in the hundred, what's in the thousands? And then she goes off. One of the ways we can modify this, he even said, by the way, here, I wrote the answer, just say it, and she won't say it. Because once she experienced failure and frustration, she became a little bit of the Incredible Hulktress and hurting herself, in fact, not hurting dad, but hurting herself. And so she's in a bad emotional state now. And even if he tells her the answer, she doesn't want to hear it. One of the ways to avoid that is, for certain students, we use the 80-20 rule, right? Which means give them 80% of what they can do before the 20% that's difficult. The first thing he asked her is, what's in the thousands place? That might have been the hardest one, 3 digits away from the decimal point. Instead, give her all the answers. Here's what's in the tens, here's what's in the hundreds, here's what's in the thousands. Which one do you want to do? Oh, the hundredths? You mean the number 5? Okay, which one is that? 5. You're right. You got it right. Terrific. Great job. Certain students, don't let them make any mistake. Support them so that they get it all right in the beginning to build confidence. Okay. Use a visual support, right? We could show her what's in the tenths and the hundreds and thousands with a label. Okay. We could also reduce the length. If you have kids with ADHD, then they're not going to deal with 9 place value problems on a page. So we just do one, and then we take a break. Let's do another, take a break. So just shrink the activity. 90% of the time, that's a simple thing to do, and it works. It's just to make the work look less intimidating. Okay. I want to talk about explain the learning curve, though. That is back to Carol Dweck's concept. Carol Dweck would say to this young girl, place value, oh, when I was your age, that took me 2 months to learn. We begin to explain that you don't just know this or not know it. Like, it's not like if you know it, you're smart, and if you don't know it, you're stupid. It's we learn over time. And we make mistakes, and that's how we learn. And we get help, and that's how we learn. And so explaining the learning curve is sort of explaining the Carol Dweck model to our students to say, I'm not interested if you know this or not. The issue is, can you try it? And if you don't know it, well, Well, that's great. That's why I'm here. So we're going to learn it. I'm going to teach it. And you have to ask for help. And that leads us to number 2 here. What's the coping skill for her? We teach our students to have a growth mindset. We're not interested if you know the work or don't know the work. It's, can you learn it over time? Can you try it? Can you ask to watch? Can you ask for help? Can you ask for a break to calm down and then come try it again? If you're a verbal student, can you negotiate? Nonverbal students can learn to ask for breaks. Nonverbal students, we can show them how to do it before we get them to do it so they see it. But verbal students can also learn to negotiate. You know, I'll try this, but teacher, can you help me with that? Trying when it's hard is essentially the growth mindset. We want to reward you for effort, not outcome. So we often create a reward program where we reward students for their effort, for trying, for asking for help, for taking a break and coming back. We don't reward them for getting the work right. We reward them for staying in the process of learning. Okay? And so that's the idea of creating a sort of trying when it's hard poster. So anybody in my classroom or anyone in my family who asks for help, who tries it, we get a point. When we get 20 points, we go to the school store, or as a family, we have a party. Okay, so this is the idea of rewarding effort, not outcome. A couple other ways to teach this, right? So one of my picture books, we have a sort of cartoon picture version of this. These are actual photographs where we show sort of right way and wrong way to sort of be in that Carol Dweck growth mindset, right? So step 1 is, hey, try to do the work the right way. The instructor gives him the work and he tries it. The wrong way, he doesn't try it. He just sort of gets angry. The right way, he asks for help when he needs it. And the wrong way is he doesn't ask for help. He just kind of gets frustrated. He doesn't understand that asking for help is sort of the way you learn. The right way, again, is he negotiates. Can I just do this one now and the other later, right? So we'd rather you do some than none. And again, the right way is he asks for a break, takes a short break, and then comes back and tries it again. This comes from we have a book, a social skill picture book for high school and beyond. So this is an example of the skill in that book. What's also available is we have these free video modeling lessons. If you go to YouTube and you put my name in, Jed Baker, or you put in No More Meltdowns, Jed Baker, when you're at the YouTube site, you'll see about 5 or 6 free video lessons that we put together. And so I'm not going to show this to you now, but in your own time, if you want, you can see video lessons of both teachers and students learning this particular skill we just went over, trying when it's hard, that it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to watch first instead of getting mad and getting into a cycle of discipline. So let's shift now from dealing with fear and avoidance of work to just dealing with fear and anxiety in general when people have a variety of fears and anxiety. The key to learning to sort of manage your fear is what we call gradual exposure, gradually facing the fear. That's the science behind reducing anxiety. But how do you get people to gradually face their fear to find out nothing bad will happen? So let's talk about this in step by step here. So first of all, number 1, you don't have to change. You don't have to deal with all the triggers. Some triggers for anxiety we can just avoid. For example, a fire alarm in a school. I don't have to get somebody habituated to the noise of fire alarms usually. Most of the time we just get a kid out of the building before the fire alarm goes on if they have a fire alarm phobia. And why is that? Because it's usually not a danger. The youngster may have a teacher or an aide who, if there was in case a real fire, would get them out of the building. So they don't have to practice this if they have a sensory issue and fire alarms are torture for them. But if you're trying to avoid all schoolwork, well, then we need to sort of get you to gradually face that fear. If they're, the kid who was afraid of going outside, maybe we want to get them exposed to that so that the kid has more opportunity to be outside at times. We also have to look at the larger context of stressors. So it's not always the anxiety symptom we have to deal with. We have to look at why they have more anxiety now. For example, I had a kid with OCD lots of fear of germs, and he had a lot of hand washing as a result. And that was a symptom we had to deal with. However, when he went to high school, it had gotten much worse. And the reason it had gotten much worse is because he had higher work demands, higher social demands, and we really had to sort of lower the work demands, give him some social group. We gave him a robotics club. We gave him a homework club so he got a lot of homework finished before he went home. That reduced the anxiety enough where the hand washing began to come down again. We still had to address the hand washing directly. However, we had to look at why are we having more of these issues now. And trauma is like that too. If someone's living in traumatic living conditions, we want to give them some respite from those traumas. We can't just, always deal with the anxiety symptom. We have to make people safe. Let's talk about how we begin to teach people how to cope with their anxiety. Step one is what I talked about before. Win them over by increasing their self-awareness. Make sure they understand their strengths and their abilities before we talk about the challenge of their anxiety. Like my OCD kid didn't want to go to school in high school because he had a ritual of showering for like 5 hours before school, and he was missing school. And the only way to win him over to work on this was to talk about all his great strengths and talents and the careers that he could have with that. And that's why we wanted him to still have the opportunity to go to high school and not just be homeschooled, so he could really tap into some of those talents and strengths. With the idea of this hopeful future, he was willing to sort of work on dealing with the challenge of his washing. And we tell him, you don't have to overcome all the OCD stuff. You still may wash a lot, but if we could get 5 hours down to maybe an hour and a half, then you can still get to high school. Number two is we educate people about their anxiety. So we begin to use the words, talk about alarm systems, that your Incredible Hulk system is an anxiety alarm system, and you need it because it keeps you safe if there's a real danger. If a car is about to hit you, you want the Incredible Hulk to move you to action to get away from there. You don't want the Dr. Banner to calculate a physics equation, because by the time he finishes that, you might be run over. You want the Incredible Hulk to move you with great speed out of there, to have that alarm reaction go off. But sometimes we inherit a very sensitive alarm system. And that means we're going to have false alarms, or what I like to call now fake news, since everybody talks about that. Anxiety is like the fake news propaganda channel in your brain. Cognitive behavior therapy is like the fact checking against that fake news propaganda worry channel in your brain. Okay. So we introduce the concept that, you're going to have this alarm reaction, but it might be fake news. And the only way you'll know it is if you gradually face the fear. And so this is the key to getting over fear, is to kind of gradually face those fears. And so since it's so hard to face fears, we don't have you face your biggest fear. We create what's called a fear ladder. And here's an example of one for someone with selective mutism. So this is a young girl who had an anxiety disorder where she could talk at home, but she wouldn't talk in school to peers or to the teacher. And we said, well, then let's create a ladder from least to most fearful, where initially you don't have to talk. You just nod yes or no. That's the first rung on the ladder. The second rung on the ladder would be you can whisper to a friend who can talk to the teacher for you. And then the third rung is you whisper to peers and the teacher. And then eventually the fourth rung is you talk in a louder voice. And the fifth is to talk to any visitor in the classroom. And so for each rung on the ladder, if you are able to do that particular rung on the ladder, we'll give you a reward. So for young kids, we often think of using rewards, like you get points towards a snack or points towards a privilege. With older kids, we don't always have to give them an external reward. Like I have a bunch of social anxiety groups for teens, and I used to give them $1 if they texted each other in between our sessions. And then eventually they'd come back and say, Dr. Baker, you don't have to give me $1 anymore. I'm just happy I have friends now, or I'm just happy I have somebody to do something with. So it was the intrinsic payoff of being able to break out of their anxiety that was reward enough. Okay, so for some people who are a little bit more concrete or younger kids, you might need an external reward. But for folks with quite a bit of language, that you may not need an external reward. For facing the fears on the fear ladder. The next issue to get people to face the fears is what we call cognitive behavior therapy, which is the fact-checking against that propaganda anxiety channel, to think like a scientist. And so there are two simple questions. Anytime an individual has fear that's in their way, fear of something that's actually not dangerous, there are two questions that I ask them to do the fact-checking. Number one, are you overestimating the probability of something bad happening? Or number two, are you overestimating how bad it would be if it did happen? So let's go back to our OCD kid who had a fear of germs. He's touching things and he's afraid that he's, going to have, what's his fear? He said he was afraid, he told us he was afraid that he will get a lethal disease because the germ, if he's not able to wash repetitively, will get into his bloodstream. So he'll get some kind of disease, and the disease will be lethal. It might kill him. So he was both overestimating the probability of something bad happening, getting a disease, and he was also overestimating the lethality, like how bad would it be, like it would kill him from his point of view. So by going onto some credible medical websites, WebMD, MayoClinic.com, we find out that he has skin that protects him from germs getting into his bloodstream. So it's really unlikely that germs get into your bloodstream, number one. However, if you wash repetitively with burning hot water and get cracks in your skin, then you might get a germ into your bloodstream. But you're still overestimating how bad it would be if that happened, because most germs are cold viruses, are stomach viruses, and these are not germs that will kill you. Like Ebola, didn't make it. And I suspect at some point coronavirus as well will be contained, and we're already working on vaccinations against coronavirus. So the point being that for this kid who had an intact immune system, he's not going to die. The probability is ridiculously low for getting into his bloodstream, and it's also ridiculously low for anybody for him to die from any of these kinds of things. So we create this Think Like a Scientist cue card for him, and we go over this card every time we see him. And this Think Like a Scientist cue card, to combat his sort of fake news propaganda worries, allow him to slowly face his fears. And this was a fear ladder for him, which had to do with touching things in public and going longer and longer amounts of time without washing his hands, until he could go a whole day without washing his hands, which was not hygienic. However, for him was an important lesson. When he went a whole day without washing his hands and discovered that he didn't get sick, he knew then he could go an hour or two without washing his hands and not getting sick. Now, in all fairness, every time he did get sick, a cold or a virus, we went back to square one again, to level one on the ladder, but we were able to get through the other rungs of the ladder more quickly. There was, if you will, like a muscle memory for that. Okay. So this is just sort of a map of the territory, how we use cognitive behavior therapy to get you to face your fears. The last piece of dealing with anxiety is there are things we can do to turn down the volume on your anxiety. And so two things that are absolutely free and are evidence-based strategies are aerobic exercise, by which I mean any exercise that increases your heart rate for some 20 minutes or more, has a profound impact on lowering anxiety, increasing confidence and mood, also increasing attention, learning, and memory. Aerobic exercise seems to work as well as stimulant medications for ADHD, at least for like a 3 to 4 hour window, and as well as SSRI medications for anxiety. Meditation, mindfulness meditation, also seems to work as well in a handful of studies as the antidepressant medications. I put a website up here called fragrantheart.com. This is a free website that allows you to download a variety of meditation guides. And I have lots of my students who listen to these 6, 7, 8 minute guides, maybe just before they go to bed, bedtime is when anxiety comes out because there's no distraction anymore from TV and computers, and so all of a sudden all the anxiety comes out, and that's a time to maybe do one of these meditation guides that has you sort of focus on the moment, focus on your breathing, focus on tensing and relaxing certain muscle groups to give you another focus and to ground you in the moment. Neurofeedback may or may not work. There's some research on how it may lower anxiety or increase attention, learning, memory. I put it there because it's a non-pharmacological alternative when sort of both behavioral and medication tools have not worked. But insurance is not likely to cover it. It may take a while, and the research, there's some research that shows no effect and some research that shows some effect. So it's a promising area. Wouldn't be my first choice, but a promising area. Medications can be an important tool in reducing anxiety, but you always have to look at sort of risk-benefit ratio. Every medication has side effects, and some of them greater than others. So the thing about anxiety medications is sometimes if a behavioral treatment hasn't worked to help somebody face their fear, the sort of CBT work of altering their thoughts, becoming more scientific in their thinking, the sort of think like a scientist cue cards, if that's not enough to get them where they need to be, sometimes we can put someone on a medication temporarily, and it allows them to begin to face their fears till they find out nothing bad happens. And then we can get them off the medication, because now that once they face their fear, nothing bad happened, often we can get somebody off that medication. So sometimes it's just an initial tool. It doesn't have to be a lifelong thing. So that's a map of the territory for dealing with sort of fear and anxiety. I wrote a book called Overcoming Fear and Anxiety. That and all the books are on Amazon. And it's a quick read that sort of goes over this sort of map of dealing with anxiety in much greater detail. So no, you cannot have a piece of cake now, but if you're calm, mommy has some beautiful consolation prizes behind curtain number 2. So that's a cartoon from our No More Meltdown book, and it's really about teaching individuals how to wait or accept no, or stop doing something fun. Like turn off a video game, all tough things to do. How do you sort of help somebody sort of wait, especially if they have very limited language? Because maybe you tell them, no, you can't have it, and they think it's the end of the world. They'll never be able to have it. Visual timers are the way to do that, and you can get those as apps now called the Time Timer app. There's several of them, and they're all pretty good. And so if you have an individual who's like dying to have this piece of cake, you could put the timer out, and what the timers do for people who cannot tell time digitally or analog, it just has a shape that shrinks over time. You could set it for 10 seconds and you say wait, and when 10 seconds are up, it beeps and they see a shape shrinking, and now they can have that sort of piece of cake. Now, if they want another piece of cake, you make them wait for 2 minutes and it's a bigger shape, but they can see the shape shrinking, and they begin to learn over time that wait doesn't mean no, you can never have it. Wait means there's this shape, and when the shape disappears, they can have what they want. So it's not the end of the world, right? For people who, have an interest like video game, and that's all they want to do 24/7 is play video games, it's really hard to get them to stop doing that unless you create a visual schedule of the thing that they want. So it's easier to stop something if they know when they can go back to it, right? So I can shut off the video game and come to dinner if I know exactly when I'm going to get to go back to it. So that's the idea of creating a visual schedule of special interests. We're not in the position of sort of stamping out people's preferences and interests, but we're just sort of carving out the when and where. Accepting no is a little bit more of a difficult skill. It's when you can't have something at all. And I had some 14 to 21-year-olds who, when they didn't get what they want, they hit people, they hit staff members, and they got kicked out of a variety of schools. They came to Douglas Developmental Disability Center, where we had an alternative high school, a GED program. They asked me to come and teach some key skills. So I'm going to show you a video where I was teaching the skill accepting no. The concept that I'm teaching these pretty verbal kids here, high school students, was that if you don't get what you want but you're calm about it, there may be other things that you can have, or you may still get what you want later, or at least there'll be other things to look forward to, okay? So that we're trying to put into their head there's always something to sort of live for. And I think you're going to see us talking about AS. Back then it stood for Asperger's Syndrome. We used the idea of AS stood for Advanced Species. We talked about all their talents and their abilities and other famous people with Asperger's as a way to sort of motivate sort of learning how to accept no, so that doesn't get in the way of all your talents. So let's take a look.
Guys, you know what all these people have in common? What are some of their talents? Anybody?
Asperger's.
They have Asperger's. What does that mean? What are some of the strengths of people? That's exactly what I think, right? Say it again.
Advanced species.
AS stands for Advanced Species, okay? A lot of people with Asperger's syndrome are brilliant, talented people, right? Oh, I have kids with Asperger's, students with Asperger's, who, you know, all of them experience stress on a daily basis in terms of handling the academic and social demands. Some people handle that by withdrawing and becoming depressed, and they don't really bother anybody else, but they're having their own internal struggle. Others handle it by externalizing and acting out and becoming sometimes verbally or sometimes physically aggressive. I'm going to get ready to interrupt you, to stop you right in the middle. You going to deal with it?
Yes.
Give me a high five. I'm so pleased that you did that. Can you put down? Because watch what I'll do. Watch what I'll do. Go ahead now. Did he stop in the middle?
Great job.
Give me a high five.
Great job.
A lot of social skills just come naturally. You sort of know what to do because you're reading other people's minds, you know, not like a psychic, but just getting an idea of, you know, if I can accept no for an answer, you know, the person will be cool with me and then I may get what I want. That just comes naturally. You're reading that perspective. That's not coming naturally for these guys. All right, check this out. Wait a second. I want to teach you something first. Hold on, Stefan. Sometimes when you ask for something like pretzels, people might say no. Look at number 56. Right? Sometimes people say no when you ask for something.
Okay, used to it.
Well, if you do get used to it, if you're cool about it, if you don't get mad, others will be pleased with you, and they might give you what you want later. Or, if they can't give you that, they might give you something else you want. Right? You can make explicit what's not coming naturally. That's the purpose of these skill lessons. Pam, can I have some of that chocolate?
I'm sorry, Jed. That belongs to somebody else.
You fascist! You're a fascist! I hate you! I can't stand you! But what you saw was just skill acquisition, just the knowledge of skills. And so what we did today won't go very far unless we also make efforts to generalize those skills, meaning to remind them of this issue seconds before they might need it. Did I accept no about the chocolate? Did I accept that? No.
She was not pleased?
She wasn't pleased. That's right. David, how was she feeling when I yelled?
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable. Did it make her want to give me the pretzels?
No.
No. We're always keeping them on sort of aware of the light at the end of the tunnel. And so we don't always have to create the artificial rewards for that. They already exist. For the most part, all of us have something invested in maintaining control. There's always something good that happens if we maintain that self-control. Oh, you want to see that?
Yeah.
No, not right now. Oh, give me a high five.
No.
You did. Okay.
So accepting no, right? Here's the issue. We teach that skill on Monday, accepting no, and then on Tuesday, they go to the snack machine in their break, in their work break, and they put money in to get their corn chips out, and nothing comes out. Do they have a moment? This is accepting no for an answer, just like Dr. Baker taught, page 38 of his manual, or do they just break the machine? They're likely to break the machine on that Tuesday morning. In other words, we said earlier, just because you teach a skill on one day doesn't mean it's going to generalize to the next day. How do you get that skill like this to generalize? Every morning with these guys, we talked about potential disappointments. And if they didn't get what they want, why it's still worth living. So if the snack machine doesn't give them the snack, I have some backup snacks in the closet, and you can come to me. There's another way to handle it, right? So we would prime the Dr. Banner forebrain before it got hijacked by the Incredible Hulk. That is the way you generalize skills. You prime the Dr. Banner forebrain just before the hijacking of the Incredible Hulk occurs. Another way to do that is we created a disappointment poster. And so what we would do is anytime someone didn't get what they wanted, if they were cool about it, we put a point on the disappointment poster. And as a group, when they got 20 points, they could go to the school store and cash out. So there was always some, light at the end of the tunnel here. There's always something to live for. So if you didn't get, your iPad, because you didn't do your homework, but you're cool about it, a point goes on the disappointment poster, and maybe you're only 3 points away from going to the school store. Okay, so that's one way to sort of always keep them in a positive frame of mind. Let's talk about self-esteem, handling mistakes, dealing with losing and teasing. These are all threats to self-esteem. Carol Dweck made it intimately clear that you got to be able to make mistakes to learn. You got to try new stuff. Mistakes help you to learn. This is a huge issue for some of my more inflexible folks, especially in that sort of level 1 autism, where they feel they need to be perfect, the best at something in order to feel some self-esteem. Rather than just feeling like they're useful and they're growing and they're learning, they have to be the best. And it's a sort of inflexibility. So I teach sort of the idea that you're supposed to make mistakes, you're supposed to learn, that's how you learn new things. So we're all going to learn this now. I want you all to repeat some words with me. We're going to say the word silk, S-I-L-K. So if you're at home on your computer, we're going to do this together. We're going to say the word silk 5 times fast together. Are you ready? I hope you are. Here we go. Silk, 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 silk. Okay, what do cows drink? Well, if you guys said milk, that's incorrect, because cows drink water. Okay, cows drink water. So if you made the mistake, calves drink milk, but cows drink water. You learn from it, because watch, we'll say the word silk 3 times fast again. Here we go. Silk, silk, silk. What do cows drink? Hopefully now you said water. Why? Because you learn from mistakes. And so this is the kind of thing I would do with my students. In our social skill manuals, we always have an activity to kind of grab their attention. And then we say, I need you to make mistakes. So I take my perfectionists and I say, I'm putting you on a behavior chart where you get rewarded, not for getting your work done correctly. Because if you're just getting your work done correctly all the time, you're probably not challenging yourself. Maybe you're just doing stuff you know. So you get rewarded for making a mistake and learning from it. So 3 points if you make a mistake and learn from it. Only 2 points if you get the work done right the first time. More rewards for handling the mistake. Number 2, what we would do is if you lose a game and you don't get mad, you win the invisible game, the game of friendship. People like playing with you. So if you lose a game and you don't get mad, you get 3 points on your reward chart. If instead you win the game, anybody can handle that, so you just get 2 points for that. So more points for losing the game and handling it. So these are some ways that we sort of handle difficult feedback. So let's talk about feedback, criticism too. I have a lot of people in the job world who, or in programs who can't handle critical feedback from staff. And so we sort of help them understand sort of constructive, helpful feedback from hurtful feedback. And then we get those staff members to say, hey, can I give you some constructive feedback? I'm not trying to hurt you. I just want to help you. And then we ready the Dr. Banner forebrain to handle the criticism. Because if we don't do that prefatory kind of statement first, they just see it as criticism and they become the Incredible Hulk. So we ready them. Hey, can I give you some feedback so you can grow? I'm trying to help you with something, not to hurt you. Are you okay to get some feedback? And then once they're ready for it, then we give them the feedback. When it comes to teasing now, let's talk a little bit about that. We teach people how to handle teasing, but one of the more important things we need to do is, in number 1 here, protect people from teasing. So a lot of times in schools, even in employment settings, we find ourselves setting up these peer programs where we get other students to protect our kids from teasing. It is traumatizing to have been bullied. I can't tell you the number of adult clients with autism that have some significant PTSD from bullying and teasing. And so what do is we develop these peer buddy programs where there are peers who kind of stand up for our kids. So let's look at one of these that we did some years ago in Millburn Middle School.
Last night we met some young people who have a form of autism called Asperger's Syndrome, gentle, vulnerable children who had become the targets of constant taunts from classroom bullies because they are different. Tonight, ABC's John Donvan looks at how one school has found a creative way to help protect these children and teach everyone something in the process.
Middle school, where the worst thing when you're one of the different kids, as Noah Orant is, the worst thing is the other kids.
In my old school, I never had many friends. I was just merely called Game Boy Freak or stuff.
Game Boy Freak?
Yeah.
That was before. This is now.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how happy would you be here?
Let's do our conversation game. Here's what we're going to do, guys.
This year, Noah attends Millburn, New Jersey Middle School, where psychologist Jed Baker is proving that the best protection for kids like Noah, who was bullied for years for his disability, Asperger's Syndrome, a form of high-functioning autism, the best protection is the other kids.
What's your favorite game to play?
Can't tell.
Can't tell. It's a secret. It's a secret.
I'm just kidding.
I think it's cool, like that. Even though they're not like me, I can still have things in common with them.
Baker has recruited Becca and other kids as essentially his assistants in teaching Noah and Eli social skills that Asperger's makes so challenging for them, like simple conversation.
It's benefiting all students to really respond to the needs to teach kids the social, emotional skills.
The thing is, they're getting it.
So it's easier here.
Yeah,
Why?
now I have like a big crew.
You have a huge crew now?
Yeah, a lot of friends.
Good, good.
In fact, kids strive to get into the program here at Millburn. More than 90% of the 8th grade class is signed up, and bullying of kids with Asperger's, it's non-existent here. Working with what were once called the uncool kids has become a cool thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's part of the identity and value of a lot of the peers in that environment to be sort of a good person.
Imagine that.
Yeah. You want to find out what game she likes?
What games do you like?
I like some kids, especially needs a lot of people just ignore them. It makes me feel really good that I made somebody else smile or just make their day.
It's like I'm in heaven here.
Really?
But back there, it's like hell.
So this is heaven.
Yes.
What Noah and other kids like him are learning here, they're going to need it, because in the world outside, Asperger's will always make them different, and most people don't get the lessons they teach so well here at Millburn Middle School. John Donvan, ABC News, Millburn, New Jersey.
Doing these peer programs is one of my favorite things to do, because we spend altogether too much time trying to get our students to sort of somehow fit in, and that's really not what it's all about to be successful. It's a two-way street. We do want to teach our students to have a variety of skills to achieve their dreams, but at the same point we want others to reach out, that others need to sort of learn how to be accommodating and understanding. So in my social skill manual is a book called Social Skills Training, and then one for sort of high school and beyond called Preparing for a Life. We have chapters on creating those peer buddy programs. Coming back to teasing, besides protecting people from teasing, we want to sort of teach people a way of thinking about teasing. So what's on the bottom of this slide, that first of all, we want our students to understand if somebody's teasing you, they're the ones who have some problem, not you. They're probably teasing other people too. And we, often adolescents in general take things personally, but often if somebody has some challenges in their life, they tend to take things way more personally because of the challenges that they've had. And so we have to really help them to understand that it may not be about you. It may be that this person is angry and irritable and having a bad day or a bad experience and needs to take it out on other people. That's the first step. The second step is sort of to check it out. Like a lot of people sort of tease as a way of almost being friendly or playing. And so check it out first. Did you mean that? Like if somebody teases you, hey, you're a jerk or you're stupid. Hey, did you mean that? Maybe the person will say, no, I'm just playing with you. But either way, if you don't like it, you can tell them to stop. But the way to tell somebody to stop is calmly. Hey, can you stop? I don't really appreciate it. You don't want to say stop in a really out of control way, like cut it out, stop, because that may show the person who likes to tease people that it really upsets you. And so you want to kind of do it in a calmer way. And then if it can, if it continues, you can ignore it. One of the easiest lines that we teach our students to use is like, whatever. If people tease you, whatever is a way to show like it doesn't get to you. That you don't have the power to control my feelings. Sometimes we draw a marionette and say, who pulls your strings? Let's cut those strings. Let's not give other people the power to control our feelings. So if somebody says something, we say, whatever. We walk away. If it continues, we report it. Now, reporting is not the same as tattling. We define tattling as reporting something that isn't dangerous. Like somebody chewing gum in school, it's against the rules, but it's not dangerous, so we don't report that. We say, don't be the rule police, right? Let the teacher deal with that. But if somebody's teasing you, that can cause emotional or physical harm, so that we report, and that's being brave, because if you report it, you're probably not just helping yourself, but helping others who might be a victim of the teasing as well. Okay, a couple more slides and I'll take some questions. Unmet needs for attention. Sometimes our students have grown up with video games, movies, TVs, and they've learned not always the best ways to get attention. Like in cartoons, it's funny when Tom and Jerry blow each other up. And yet in real life, when you blow people up, it's not so funny. I had a very bright student who thought it was pretty hilarious if you stick people with a pencil. And everybody was teaching him, hey, that's not the way, it's like treat people the way you want to be treated. And that was a terrible rule for him, treat people the way you want to be treated, because he literally wanted people to stab him with a pencil. And so the goal is not to treat people the way you want to be treated. The goal is treat people the way they want to be treated. And that's what he had to learn. They don't want to be stabbed with a pencil. They're not going to like you for that. So we had to sort of teach him good ways to get attention. And let me show you what that looked like. We would we made a little cue card like this. Things he could say in public, things he could say in private. You can use other words like friendly or unfriendly or expected or unexpected, to use Michelle Garcia Winner's words. The reason I have this up here is this was a kid sometimes who also would say things like in public, he'd ask people, are you a virgin? Or he'd say he went to the airport, he'd say, I got a bomb. He'd say, what race are you? He'd say, what religion are you? These were provocative things to say. And we said, you can only use these sensitive topics, sex, violence, race, religion, and politics, in private. You can ask your therapist, you can ask your teacher, your parent, but you can't say it out loud to, well, you can't say it to the teacher, no, but you can ask your parents, your therapist. But in public, we want you to stick to some other things to talk about, like the past. How was your week? Or future? What are you going to do after school? What are you going to do this weekend? Or present? What are you guys reading? What are you guys playing? Or other people's interests. Hey, or common interests. Hey, did you see the new Star Wars movie? Or you could compliment people or ask them to play a game. These are all fine things to do in public, but avoid these sensitive topics. So this was a little cue card to both sort of teach him the okay things to say and the not okay things to say. And it was also a little cue card to help him generalize the skill. We would go over this with the Dr. Banner forebrain before he was sort of in this sort of more impulsive Incredible Hulk zone or in a setting where he might accidentally say the wrong thing. So let me come back to this slide too. Some people, we need to schedule attention, right? So some people crave attention 24/7, and we might need to sort of carve out the time when you can approach somebody. We might need to give them like red and green cards to show like we're available when the light is green, but when it's red, that's not a time to come talk to the teacher because she's doing conferences with other students, right? Or we might use a timer with a parent. This is when you can come talk to me. But not when I'm on the phone, et cetera, and so on. A lot of my more provocative kids who like to get attention in negative ways, I don't know the research on this, but anecdotally, when we gave them an appropriate outlet like the theater, they became much more appropriate. Knowing that they were going to have their time on stage made it a whole lot easier to sort of be appropriate at other times. Okay, so those are just a little bit of the map of the territory and sort of getting attention in ways that make people like you and not just getting attention just to get attention. So sometimes I've used a loss system. I don't like using loss systems because we said if you have the Incredible Hulk, it can make things worse, right? You don't want to add fire to fire. But sometimes when people are getting attention, they're not necessarily, in inappropriate ways, they're not necessarily having an Incredible Hulk moment where they're out of control with negative emotions. Sometimes they're almost a little too happy. And so this might be a time when you could use a response cost system. Response cost is where I give you a reward, like you can have a snack, you can watch The Simpsons, at night when you come home. But if you say something inappropriate in school, that's a warning. If you say it again, you get a second warning. The third time, you lose that snack. The next time, you lose 10 minutes of watching The Simpsons at night, and so on. So there's a cost for responding with those inappropriate phrases. Again, I would not do this with an Incredible Hulk who is overly anxious, depressed, or angry, but with someone who's just overly silly, you might be able to do this, but it could backfire. The other thing you might have to do is sort of, you may have to teach others to ignore it, because if a kid says something inappropriate, like a sexual comment that's inappropriate and people giggle and laugh, even if he loses his snack, he or she might not care because somebody thinks I'm funny, so they're going to just keep doing it, right? So you sometimes have to teach peers to ignore the inappropriate behavior and only respond to when they do the appropriate thing. Like, in other words, if they ask, how was your week? Interact with them. But if they say something, like I have a bomb, you avoid them, right? You say, oh, I can't talk to you about, I can't talk to you if you're going to talk about inappropriate things, and then you walk away. Let's talk about sensory issues. So we could do days and days on dealing with sensory issues. One of the things I mentioned to you before is when you see a lot of self-stim, somebody rocking back and forth, flapping their hands, or they're scripting over and over SpongeBob, sometimes what that's about is you're not engaging their brains. So either you're above their head or you're boring and below their head. And so consider that it's not always about like replacing that self-stim. It's really about, how do I get this person engaged in what I'm saying? How do I modify the task we're doing? Like when I work with less verbal students, if I ask them too many verbal questions, they may do some self-stimming. But if I come back to something that I know they can do, touch your nose, touch your head, all of a sudden I've got them engaged again, okay? People are entitled to the sensory environment that works for them. And so if it's too noisy, they can have a quieter environment. But people have to learn how to be good self-advocates for the environment that works for them. So I have a young adult group, and one of the young ladies there used to scream at the other people when they were too loud. Shut up, cut it out, you're too loud. But we taught her how to be a good self-advocate. She could tell them, guys, can you quiet down? And then if they didn't quiet down, she'd say, Dr. Baker, can I take a break? And I say, yep, take a break. I'm going to get them quiet. When I got them quiet, I'm bringing you back. So she had a right to the quiet environment, but she couldn't necessarily force it upon all the other people. But she was allowed to take a break, and then I could just bring her back when it was quiet again. Okay, so a lot of the times what we're doing is teaching people how to be good advocates for the sensory environment that they need. There's a couple of types of sort of self-stim and sensory issues that I want to talk about that can get people in trouble. And they have to do with sort of touch, okay touch, not okay touch. Not just about touching other people, but maybe about touching themselves, like masturbation, right? So this video, this visual that you see is sort of a visual sort of teach people like okay ways to touch in public and sort of not okay ways to touch, say, at the school kind of thing. And I have some students that I have just a no-touch policy, because if I teach them to do a high five or a handshake, they're a little too close to somebody's private part and they touch anyway. So for certain students, I just have a no-touch rule in school. But if they have sensory issues and they need to like touch things, we can give them dolls and inanimate objects to fidget and touch with to meet the sensory need, rather than touch someone who doesn't want to be touched. right? And when it comes to sort of masturbation, sometimes we need to teach, that that's a private behavior, not a public behavior. And we sort of teach the when and where, of when and where that's okay, not okay in school, not okay in the work setting, that's okay at home in your private sort of, private area, private time. And we might designate a private place where they can do that, okay? The last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll take some questions, is teaching people to get ready for all the unexpected triggers. So I've been trying to give you the map of the things that might set somebody off and get in the way of their talents and strengths, but sometimes we don't know what's going to trigger someone. And for those students, we create this like relaxation folder with pictures and words that describe the activities that are calming for them. What's their plan when they get upset? What are they going to do? And maybe it's also got a picture of the people they trust, their safety person, the Scarlett Johansson in the school building or at home that they go to help them solve the problem. And so we would go over that sort of relaxation folder in the beginning of the day. If you get upset, here are the activities you do to calm down. Here's the person to go to. And then when they are upset, we go through that sort of relaxation folder again to sort of prompt them how to self-soothe. If you have a verbal student, I like to add some important self-talk, and that is the following phrase we say to people every morning. Good things may happen, not so good things happen, but I promise you, whatever happens, all problems can be solved or at least improved if you can do two things. If you can wait and talk to the right person. I will help you solve the problem. I will make it better, but I may not be there when it happens. Can you wait till the end of class? Can you wait till the end of the day? What is this about? It's about this. If I know that they can trust somebody in a school building or in a work environment, trust equals hope. Hope that the problem can get better. Trust equals hope equals greater self-control. If I trust that there's someone who will make this problem better, I have hope it can get better and I can control myself. If I lose all hope, sometimes I lose self-control. So this is something we want to embed into that Dr. Banner forebrain, that whatever unexpected thing happens, there's a way to solve it. There's a way to make it better. All you got to, if you could just wait and talk to me or talk to these other people that we trust, the Scarlett Johanssons in your life, we will make it better. Okay. So I want to do some Q&A now. I'll just make this a closing comment. As caregivers, can we all tolerate our own discomfort long enough not to act like the Incredible Hulk, but to sort of think about what we want to do rather than make it worse? And do you enjoy what you're doing as a caregiver? All of you listening, just like our students, we want our students to feel valued, to feel useful. Well, that is what you guys are. You guys are important, valuable, and useful. You might not be making hedge fund Wall Street money, but that's not the key to life satisfaction. The key to life satisfaction is you have a positive impact on other human beings. So give yourself a pat on the back for the positive work that you do. It's meaningful, it's needed, we need you, keep doing it, okay? And what we want to do is find ways for our students to feel that same thing, to feel useful, to feel needed, to feel valued. So with that, I'm going to go into the Q&A and see what we've got here. Let's see. Okay, so somebody asked, how would you work on self-awareness with a non-verbal student? What would that look like? So let's differentiate sort of. There are students who have apraxia, who have verbal issues, but have plenty of conceptual ability to conceive their self-awareness, and that person could benefit from a visual on their strengths and smaller number of challenges. But if you're talking about someone with less conceptual ability, then they may not have the ability to sort of conceive of sort of abstract strengths and challenges so easily. But what we want to do is certainly put them in the position of doing things that tap their strength. so that they're enjoying the quality of their life. But we're also teaching all the people around that individual, the caregivers, about that individual's strengths and challenges, so that all those people can continue to guide that person into areas of life that tap those strengths. So it may be more about working with the people around that student. Oh, somebody asked, what is DDD? Department of Developmental Disabilities. Department of Developmental Disabilities is a government branch that can provide important residential supports for people with profound disabilities. So that was, somebody answered that question already anyway. Let's see. I'm just reading the question. So when someone is in fight, flight, or freeze, and we know that restraint and seclusion is trauma-inducing, what alternatives can be used that can keep everyone safe? Okay, so if somebody is actively hurting somebody else, we may have to physically prevent that from happening. So there have been times I've had to put somebody's arm down and put myself in between two students so that someone else didn't get hurt. But in general, what I'm looking to do is a form of distraction, just what I said, okay? So that could be a special interest, a novel item they've never seen before. So for my less verbal students, some of those sort of distractions have sometimes been different scents, like I might carry vanilla, cinnamon, chocolate, and other things that they can smell. Maybe sounds, because I'm a drummer, so I have all kinds of percussive instruments. And I might have different things that make different sounds as a novel thing they've never seen before. But, you know, for my more verbal students, it might be a special interest that they have. And so I bring out my magazine on pop culture and they're interested in a particular celebrity, and we begin that conversation to get their mind off things. So I'm looking to distract rather than the concept of restraint, okay? Let's see. Somebody asked, how do some of the things, I'm not sure what that means, translate to the world of work? If a supervisor tells you to work, you can't negotiate, etc. Well, it depends on the work environment. There's certainly plenty of work environments where you, in fact, can negotiate your break time. You can negotiate what you might need help with, what you can do without somebody. So it sort of depends on the job, and it depends on the supervisor. But, you know, like asking for help is something that a lot of supervisors, in fact, do want you to do. So case in point, I had a client who had a pretty high-level professional job in the city and in the accounting area, and very high-functioning guy. When he didn't know what to do, he just wouldn't do any work at all. And they thought he was then just being lazy, and it was because he was too embarrassed to ask for help. And then they were really sort of pushing him that you just need to ask for help so you can get it done. But then if he asked for help, they were annoyed, like, hey, we already told you this. So then he was caught in this place like, well, you want me to ask for help, but then you're mad at me if I ask for help. So we had to work with the employers as well, you know, that if you want him to ask for help, then you can't be mad that he asked for help, but we also had made sure that he wrote down the answers to questions so that he wouldn't ask the same questions over and over again. Oh, okay. Somebody said, can you please return to the slide on waiting, accepting? No, I'd like to see here about natural law systems again. Oh, so I guess what I meant about natural law systems, rather than introducing a punishment, is that, you know, if you can't accept no, you know, like I go to the supermarket with you and you throw a tantrum every time, a natural law system means maybe that parent isn't taking that student back to the supermarket, like, because it doesn't work, right? So that's what I meant about natural law system, that sometimes if you act out too many times in a particular area, sometimes people don't have you back to that particular area. Let's see what else people are asking. Can you provide me information on how you create a peer assistance program based around social skills instruction for students? So there's a little bit more detail in my books on social skill training, and the book called Preparing for Life. But basically, you know, we seek the typical peer volunteers to assist us, as we often call them, peer leaders, who we also explain to them, you know, when you help others, it actually makes you live longer. There's actual research on that, that when you help people, it increases a hormone called oxytocin. It gives you better immunity. So helping people actually makes you live longer in a certain way. But we also, we don't make students do this. This is by volunteer only. And we find that certain students really need, in a school system or maybe in a work setting, to feel they need that sense of value. And it's not always the students that are doing remarkably well with their academic work. It's often students who maybe, you know, are mediocre students, but find all of a sudden that they can be a tremendous help to a student who's having more challenges. And so then we'll do some initial training with them about sort of cueing into people who might have trouble with their social, who might be shy or anxious or new to the school. So we don't always say, hey, I want you to help me with someone with autism, especially if it's for higher functioning students. We might say it's for students who might be shy, new to the school, need some help socializing. And then so it's often not geared to for a specific student, but for a group of students, and we're not using the names of those students. However, there are times when one particular student has engaged in so much sort of provocative behavior that it upsets other people and nobody wants to interact with that student. And then I have had to get permission from that specific student and their family to talk about him or her by name. Because if I don't talk about him or her by name, nobody's going to change their behavior towards that student because they're disliking that student. So when a student is really engaged in behavior that puts people off, often I try to get permission from that student and the student's family to talk specifically about that student. But otherwise, we're doing a more generic peer buddy program where we're asking people to assist maybe at a club, out at recess, during lunch, for students who may not have somebody to interact with. Do you have a preferred social skill curriculum that is beneficial for high school students? So I like this question because it gets to something I may not have made clear. Social skills curriculums are tools. But to be effective in teaching social skills, you don't want to use just a one-size-fits-all curriculum. You want to do what I said, target the skills that on a daily basis are relevant for that student. Make sure they are motivated to learn and want to learn that skill. Make sure that you're teaching it in a way that jives with their language functioning so they can understand the goal. Make sure you've made efforts to generalize the skill with either a cue card or a reminder app, or helping the people surrounding that student to remind the student what to do. Right? Make sure that you also have an inviting environment for that student. Maybe there's been some peer training going on. Make sure that you've also evaluated outcome. Those are the keys to social skills training. That being said, you could purchase my social skill curriculum in Preparing for Life. You could purchase Michelle Garcia Winner's social skills curriculum for sort of that level 1 autism. The social thinking curriculums are very good for sort of that level 1. But these are tools, these are skills. And it's not the same as making sure you hit all the effective components of skills training, okay? Let's see. I'm just reading. Would you give the student the no-touch slide as a cue card that they can carry around, or is that easy? Or that is easily accessible for reminders? So yeah, Amy asked this question, would you give students the no-touch slide? Not sure which no-touch. Maybe, oh, you mean sort of good touch, not good touch. I would often have a visual that if they don't carry it around, the people who work with them carry that around to prime them before they're around other people. So somebody has to be carrying that cue card around as a generalization reminder. So I'm going to keep answering questions until Kaylee or Kristen cuts me off here. So let's see. I'm not sure what some of these, what is the college rate again? I'm not sure what that meant. Let's see. Any useful resources for nonverbal level 1 learners? So nonverbal is really level 3, not level 1. Are there any resources for nonverbal learners to learn self-calming strategies? So the relaxation folder is a visual where you have maybe a picture of the student upset, a picture of the activities that are calming. Maybe they like to sort of, let's say they just like to build things with Legos, and then a picture of the people that are safety people for them. And so you kind of show that picture. Here you are upset. Here's what you do to calm. Here's the person you go to for help. And when they get upset, you go through that sort of picture sequence and see if they can self-regulate. Now, if they can't follow that picture schedule, then what you do is you have to be the person who tries to engage them in the Legos or the activity that may be calming for them. But the goal is for them to learn to self-regulate by using that kind of picture schedule. So I think, let me see, we are at 12:30, yes?
I think we're right at the end point. So are you all good with all your questions, you think, for now? Maybe if there's time for one more, maybe.
Okay. So where I don't see another question here. Maybe
okay.
tell me what question you see, and I'm happy to answer.
There was one more question about what's the difference between a peer and a buddy program, and we had somebody saying I would rather have a buddy to learn about my child and my child to learn about the peer, not necessarily just a buddy to play games with. I see one question about that. If you have any
okay. I don't want my buddy to have a buddy to just play games with. I like him to learn about her and learn about them and perhaps what they have in common. Yeah, I mean, peer buddy programs, peer leader programs, peer programs. I use some of these words interchangeably to describe any efforts we're making to help some of the students that are identified to us to be able to be successfully integrated into whatever environment they're in, where we're not just sort of working with our identified kid, but we're working with the peer environment, and we're having kids who may volunteer to reach out to our student who isn't just there to necessarily play with the kid, but it is there to actually engage in conversation. But let's be clear that these programs are to create an inclusive, accepting environment. They don't always lead to friendship. Friendship happens when you begin to sort of do some matchmaking about people who have common interests. So if I do a robotics club and I have sort of so-called neurotypical kids with kids who have some social challenges in there together, but they have common interests, that might be a basis for friendship, right? So some of our peer buddy programs create this sort of accepting environment but don't guarantee friendship. But other efforts, sometimes when we create theme-based groups based on interest, can lead to actual friendship. And so I would think I would encourage people, when they think about grouping people together for social skill experiences, that you do it based on all the participants' natural interests, because that's going to create a more natural reason to be friends and to talk.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for that answer and for your time and all of the expertise that you shared with us today. We really can't thank you enough.
My pleasure. It's a map of the territory. It's not the territory, but all of us, we roll up our sleeves and we get into the territory day by day, and that's how it works.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And for participants, I do have just a few last reminders. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Baker.